ये श्लोक दूसरा भाग में
Later, I have a question. So Shantideva disappears after dying to the Bodhisattva's body. And they find him, and he says, oh, no, go, the book is in my eaves of my cabinet, right? Okay, so the question was, India was really dangerous. What if it had never been found? You know, what is, you know,
good idea. Yeah.
no, like, you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll ask.
Yeah, just somebody brought that up, like,
That's good idea.
what a check, like, why didn't he take it with him? Or-
Absolutely, it's a good question. Yeah,
Okay, just a thought.
yeah, I'll ask.
Hi, Anthony.
So we begin with the Heart Sutra in English on page 2. Thus I've heard. At one time the Blessed One was dwelling in the royal domain of Vulture Peak Mountain, with a great gathering of monks and a great assembly of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Blessed One was absorbed in the samadhi of the many aspects of phenomena called profound appearance. At the same time, noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva, looking at the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, saw the 5 skandhas and their natural emptiness. Then, through the power of the Buddha, Venerable Shariputra said to the noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva, how should a son of a lineage trained who wishes to follow the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom? Thus he spoke, and the noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva answered the venerable Shariputra with these words. Shariputra, those men and women of the lineage who wish to follow the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom should look at it like this. The 5 skandhas should be seen purely in their natural emptiness. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form also is not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, recognition, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, like this, all phenomena are emptiness, and having no characteristics, they are unborn and unceasing. They are not impure or pure. They neither decrease nor increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no recognition, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no sensation, no phenomena. There is no quality of sight and so on until no quality of mind and no quality of mental consciousness. There is no ignorance and no exhaustion of ignorance and so on, up to no old age and death and no exhaustion of old age and death. In the same way, there is no suffering, no origin, no ending, and no path. No wisdom, no attainment, and no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, since there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and abide by means of the profound perfection of wisdom. And since their minds have no obscurations, they have no fear. Transcending falsity, they attain nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the 3 times have relied upon the perfection of wisdom, and have become true and complete Buddhas of unsurpassable, perfect, and complete enlightenment. Therefore, the mantra of the profound perfection of wisdom, the mantra of insight, the unsurpassed mantra, the unequaled mantra, the mantra which calms all suffering should be known as truth, for it is not deceptive. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is proclaimed. Teata om gate gate paragate parasamgate bodhi soha. Shariputra, this is how a bodhisattva mahasattva should train in the profound perfection of wisdom. Then the Blessed One arose from that samadhi and said to the bodhisattva mahasattva, noble Avalokiteshvara, that he had spoken well. Well done, O son of the lineages, so. O son of the lineage, since it is just so, the profound perfection of wisdom should be practiced just as you have taught, and the Tathagatas will also rejoice. When the Blessed One has said this, the Venerable Shariputra and noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva, and the entire gathering, as well as worldly beings, gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, rejoiced and praised the words of the Blessed One. Lama dan gambo jetsu jambe yang la jase kange lo dre tenye nyedan nanda raza yue chenye dengo cheje zeche nije tu ka le banze kanda sebe zere mari medo dunga jisewe roto kwela puchi tati yala juju yambienso Druta chedu nyemo nilo leche jadu drudeche mare meze dunga nyugu chene junde rajena dene dachi saju tatu yede ludo jase tuyaku Chena jene jere dalu meze jambe yana Arabadana di Arabadana di Arabadana di Jejera veseji Dalo dema mabarasani Kada denju yulu tobayi Lodra babena watadoso Continue with the short mandala offering on page 16. Saji Koti Joje Medora Rirali Yenide Jamani Sanje Jindo Mide Buai Lobe Nada Yela Jabarasho Jetsun Lama Amba Jena Je Juga Kala Chese Jujene Cheda Zambe Duje Zamala Zaje Chuje Chaba Wadoso Edam Guru Rana Mela Lagane Adayame Continue refuge prayer on page 22. Sanje Chodan Soje Jonama Janju Bardo Dane Chadoji Nage Chuje Jibe Sanami Lala Benjira Sanje Dubarajo Sanje Cheda Zoje Jonama Janju Bardo Dane Chadoji Nage Chuje Jibe Sanami Lala Benjira Sanje Dubarajo Cheda Zoje Jonama Janju Bardo Dane Chadoji Nage Chuje Jibe Sanami Lala Benjira Sanje Dubarajo
It's working, right? You guys hear me? Is it working, Mike? Shirayamata. Shirakomata. Very good. Very good. Manjuja. My mom don't know how to kiss that. Can we get to say? 그래도 제일 나이나. 그러면 못 가봐요. So, okay? You guys okay? Hear me okay?
I'm too close, I can only hear you.
I can't hear you.
Oh,
I don't
okay.
think you're amplified.
What is it? Come on.
Anthony, can you turn it up just a little bit, just a tiny bit?
Oh, crank it to 11.
That's good.
It's
Just a tiny bit.
It's louder than 10, it's 11.
That's right. That's right. Because normally I'm very soft-spoken and I don't really feel comfortable, just raising my voice.
Maybe,
It confuses me when I.
would you want to try a over-the-ear microphone?
No, I think
This should be
this
okay.
works very
It works,
well.
right?
This
Yeah,
has to be
it's
loud
fine,
enough.
yeah.
That's all.
Is that a Shure 57?
Is it running, Tony?
Is that the brand? Sure.
Got a reading on it, but I don't, check
Is it moving the meters?
there's pulse on it.
So So here was.
Oh, yeah, it's good now.
Okay, it sounds like we're good.
Yeah, it's better now, right?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay,
Yes.
great.
Hey, Tony.
Thank you, Anthony.
Anthony, sound man extraordinaire.
Superman, Anthony.
다들 모두 쉬어야게 참대 쇼지나 대야 따도 재빈부 세대기 살베제 달라 류순 강신나 내버려 빵바데 대교 강기 토지나 집은 매비 제빵배 대야 따도 재빈부 세다가 변로 이살까지 다들 쉬어야돼 대야 따도 재빈부 대야 따도 재빈부 전바 힘도 교련 중 괜히 지위 채원이 시벌 주니 듬비제 세트소 쉬어야지
What page are we?
We're on page, it's a Roman,
Verse 8.
it's a root verse, depending on theology, and we're on verse 8.
Verse 8.
Verse 8, yeah. You have a text that's we're on verse 8.
Okay.
대리사가 쉬어야 돼 대야 따도 재빈부 듣고 하는 쉬어야지 그럼
Yeah, verse. It is, you actually do that by being mindful at all times. Mindfulness should come from sharp attention with effort. This attention becomes what is called the greatness of peace.
다가지 뭐래야 달라 류순 강신나 내번주와 빵바데스 모두 다 류순이야 류 땅와 순와 다바 빼와 소소 류데 대대가 나네 단다 근데 류순와 가도 되래 류순와 달라 단다가 류순야 첸데 류순야 지다 지와 지만 나서 어느 류야 보주 유약 제도 주살래야 그래다 세치메기 류를 내번주와 그래서 빠니 세치메기 류야 보주 유약 제도 지 단다 말은 소리 토대하게 류대 아니 순조야 보지 지 건달 첸데 류순야 지다 마음 중원 주기 류야 보지 유약 제도 어느 순조지 지 아니래 제가 다 치매 류순한테 가서 무슨 공부 좀 받으래 갑자기 주의에 때마다 나비 주의 방황해서 봐. 뭔가 주의한테 소고도 손선 받지. 다들이 cender은 누주 방황스. cender은 누주 방황스 해야 되는 거지나. 대교 강의 터지나. 리브메비 제 방비에서 되는 방법 주로도. 제가 단도 좀 들으시나. 먼저 류드 숨고요. 다른데 류드 숨고 류드라 단나 말을 터대요. 류지요. 마음을 소소는 중원 주의를 지어요. 제가 단단한 소리 여대고 류대요 숨겨고 제고래서 마음을 있는 소소라니 류야 보지 더더 제고래서 봐. 그래서 참아도 준세 가르래나 단단 소소를 여대고 류도 숨고야 준세 가르래. 마음을 소소를 류 상보지 용고야 준세 가르래나 라니 집보다 되고 여기 좀 말해. 제가 셔도 주야기 제도 소대라 셔도 주야기 제도 yendu ja chimbo judo yendu de chujo de me yendu ja chimbo judo ya chedo ane me de kichi bole es ore jaza de shona de na dibo me be je pang be so do jaza de gwe kang ge to je nas le su kan ye na ne bar jo pang ba des ma ba le le zambo ji yuan ge chedo ane 대 가지 내봐서 빵을 해서도 대답 빵 투에다 가르치는 연구를 난 가지 내봐 마와 소소 로이 되는 무대고 다 저데 철로를 시다 반주수 로야케모도 소소 그 주요를 유비 아니 시비기 등니 연대고 배나 장주의 생 제노야노 장주의 생 뭐야 제바 저디나 무슨 제비 되는 연구를 대 생주지래 담비 주면서 변내 봐 담비 주면서 변내 봐 담비 주면서 봐야 근데 주 전도 미비가 생기지도 않은 연구를 어디네 이제 다른 놈만 보여줘요. 배나서 순주 순다 마송데 순주 순한테야 생기는 요거를 순주 무슨 한테 생기는 요거를 저 달류 되네 요거를 나한테 저 생기는 요거 저는 저대다 먼저做起来지 생기는 요거를 순다 근데 알아서 그래 마음바 뢰들이 토니 얘도 자치 보지 루트야 제도 어느 것도 루스 못 배워 돼.
So let's go back to the verse 7, where Krishna is summarizing that. Verse 7, which we already went through during our last session. But it's important to summarize once again. Here, what is protecting the body? It is giving up what is harmful. How is this attained? By giving up all fruitless movements. All fruitless movement. It's in the verse 7. You can read that verse 7 so you will see it. Did you see?
Movements that bear no result.
Yeah, no result. So we have discussed on protecting body, or with regard to body, so which is giving away one's body, protecting, purifying, and enhancing. So regarding those four giving away, protecting, purifying, and enhancing with regard to body have been covered during our previous session. But now today that we are focusing on what is meant by protecting one's body, the body of this life and that of future life, and why it is important for us to have a positive body of future life. So now, when we speak about protecting this body, dedicating towards having a better body in the future life, it's not just for one's own fulfillment. It's just not only to benefit one's own self, but the very purpose of protecting this body, this present body, as well as protecting the body of future, is to working for the welfare of other sentient beings. This is the core motivation that one should have when we talk about protecting this body. Because if we lack the reasoning of why we are important to protect this body, as well as protection of the future body, we might think that it's just mere benefiting oneself, which is completely wrong. Because in this particular context, when we talk about body, protecting one's body at this time, as well as the future body, is to really work for the welfare of other sentient beings. It is for this purpose. One should exert an effort to protect this body. So protecting this body here again is giving up or not indulging in negative activities, not indulging in activities that are harmful to others. This is what is meant by protecting our body, this body, and by protecting this body, by following those practices, observing those practices, what will happen to us is then this will ensure a better future body. So that very purpose of having a better future body is to work for the welfare of other sentient beings for this purpose. So all of this protection of one's body is very much related to one's own mind. such as practicing bodhicitta, upholding the practice of sublime dharma, and observing morality or the ethical disciplines. So all of this must be, all of this are the favorable condition for protecting this life and becoming a cause for having a better body in the future life. So,
다들 조들이만 쉬어 조들 대양 다도 준비 주스 대양 다도 준비 주 대양 세대들 제 권리야 들을 유순 강의는 내버려 pompa 대시 안내수에서 그래서 그게 제가 대소 대양 안에 다도 세대 가도 이나세 가도 이나세 하는 게 다도 다도 제배 누들서 테마 지상에서 많이 뒤따도 소속이 야야야야 쟁기제나 쟁배제고래 대 쟁비용한게 야야 뒤따도 쟁배 주지지 근데 고안이야 내가 저서데 방토하지 용거를 해서
so then the verse 8, the very first line, verse 8 here we read, you actually do that by being mindful at all time. So protection of one's body, as we mentioned earlier, the protection of one's body is very much to do with one's own mind. So this protection of one's such as practice of bodhicitta, observing moral discipline or the ethical disciplines, and upholding the teachings of the sublime dharma are very much to do with one's mind. When it comes to the mental actions, the virtuous mental actions, and that requires a mindfulness. So therefore, it's that you actually do that by being mindful at all time. And one should always remain mindful. And mindfulness is cultivated at all time, not just remembering one time or just leave aside and try to remember the next day and so on and so forth. But rather, one should remember sustain this mindfulness at all time, because the mindfulness is something that is very, very important for us to really to examine our mind and examine the state of our mind and the characteristic of our mind. So therefore, it requires a cultivation of mindfulness at all time.
제가 대양세대 관례 내번주 방법에서 소소 제가 지만도 중요한 주요는 안다 요대 묘대 속에 가제도 방법에서 가제도 방법 대양 다도세 뒤수 때문에 뒤수 다도스 제바세대 시바레 생주지에 제가 다도세대 뒤지 제바세대 로지 시바 생주지 시바레 제베 제가 뒤따도 관리 방법이 된다 소 뒤따도 소소기 생주 템비게 템베 템바이나 아니 마음발에 소소기 아니 부비된 대는 무토를 해서
All this harmful giving up what is harmful should be giving away one's harmful activities should be done on the basis of activation of mindfulness. So mindfulness is very important again here. Not just one time, but be mindful at all time. In other words, and cultivate mindfulness at all times. And not just once, but all time. And then mindfulness, belong to the category of mental factor. So when we talk about the mind, there are primarily divided into two: the primary mind and the mental factor. The mindfulness not a primary mind, but it is a mental factor. So this mental factor, what we call mindfulness, is something that is very important to be cultivated at all times.
Is that
제가 제바시형도 상고 다 tenyago yuji dang, yote tenyu tenpa senju ji, ni xewa xewa. Tanda tangpo nge tenyago yuji wana jewa ina, tenpa siyada kanda jirin samuru na, anju shuwa shetan jina tenpa siyade, njibi ngumbo la senji jeba mepa de, namba miyu li je no se ore. Chetan, tato shuwa nana sori, njibi ngumbo la as, soso dan anju yang nji de shuru, mbenzi paro, che tobo toma tang, soso le ya wang de jala tuzo, kati yu soso ndar tonya yu pa tang, tiba riya yu pa, tanda mambo soso nali jala yu de, soso nji de tanda soso nali jala kari do, sang tabi kari chana, tengu do amo to, chesan, ko tenda yu njibi ngumbo la, senji jeba meba, ma jeba chukore, njibi ngumbo yinba, senji jeba meba yinba, ane number meyu wili jeder sambo de number de kadyu ni yele ya shasha wa de dengi mato yingwa mayimba tene ju go timba sia de ndibi mu bola senji jeba me ba de number meyu wili jes ne ta zo lu chi chu song song da tene timba de chedan timba sia de
제주 송대 기사 인제 송다.
cheju song de ambo de ndi yor ta yor dang ane nangba dang chele sen rwa tomol shataba jena yor che
이게 너무
ane nangba che nangba jwa ane chele che o de sore.
So as we talked about mindfulness, it's again, we talked about it, that belongs to the category of mental factor. And suddenly we're talking about subjective rather than objective. And the mindfulness is subjective, and object that is being mindful. What is being mindful is the objective. And so there's involvement of subjective and objective, right? What you are being mindful is by remembering the whatever the object, it is a focal object that you are familiar with. And you are constantly familiarizing with that particular object and becoming familiar with this particular object. And when this mental factor become inseparable, almost like inseparable from that particular object, and then you are able to be mindful of that particular object. That is what is meant by mindfulness in this particular context. Of course, when you talk about mindfulness, that there could be many divisions of mindfulness, but in this particular context, it's a very single-pointed, observation of the object, and without wandering from that particular object, but you're being actually observing that object, without forgetting it, single pointedly. That is what is meant by mindfulness in this particular context. So when it comes to the mindfulness, there are in this particular context, the mindfulness consists of three characters. First, that requires an object that to be one that's object that mindfulness actually focusing on, which is also known as focal object. And then second characteristic is the number, which is the aspect of the mindfulness. And the third characteristic is the functions of the mindfulness. So in brief, the mindfulness consists of three characteristics: object, aspect, and functions.
What was the first one?
Object,
Object,
Yeah.
effect.
So that is, that's what is meant by sharp attention.
Object
yeah,
effect
that's right, yeah.
and object effect and
Aspect and function.
function.
So, okay, so when you're talking about mindfulness, it seems like the meaning of mindfulness is rolling, like it's being used but every time it's being used, it's kind of the same, but it has different aspects. Like it just means don't be lazy for the situation you're presented for. You know, whatever comes your way, don't be lazy.
But you're remembering it constantly and not ignoring that, but try to remember and observing it.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what meant by mindfulness.
Okay, so your agitation is outside of you. Any agitation or, okay, yeah, I got it. Sorry. I had to code it in.
당원들 템바성도 상고 나중으로서 소소리에 눈썹 매딩 이제 상 차고 당지 말이 자 템바서야 돼 단다 소소인데 이사를 상지 템바 용도 상을 용거로 다 보면서 제가 막 상을 여들어 봐 근데 템바서 오래 다 당이 제주송 송도 제주송은 당보 유지 쳐받들라 리뷰 보스 거래 리뷰 보때 메나 템바체 도고에 말 말아도 간다지 템바체 와이나 당보 소소 때지 리니 아니 얘네 때 템바체 히지 아마도 소소 리뷰 보지다 마체 봐라 템바체 시야만도 말아서 스플로 간 템바체 서그래다 마 템바체 야나 튜비오만 템고래 야나 소소 지문의 통 배워하고 템고라 배는 소소 때는 나리야 자동차 모드보다 소소 대세게 지금 구자로 선들한테 요소 단다 쟁도 와서 저데 요더라 하장은 팀은 리버서서 엔단다 로열이야 또 쟁도 와 자상 리뷰 보면은 제발주는 제일 많은 분이 대면을 지지도 못해 리뷰 보세요 유지가 리뷰 보세요.
So the first object talked about out of three characteristics, the first is the object. So mindfulness requires object. That's an object. That is object that's something that is familiar, a familiarity with one's own mind. Because without, being familiar or having familiarity with that particular object, the mindfulness regarding that particular object is not possible. So therefore, first, just have this object and you become very familiar with this particular object, and you are being able to remember that object anytime, at all times, wherever you go. For instance, if you have a coffee cup at your home, and as soon as you think of that, you remember that. It is because you have no obstruction, but you're able to remember vividly as soon as possible. As soon as you think of my coffee mug, or cup, or mug, whatever you say. And that you will remember instantly without any obstructions. Do you remember it? It's because you have familiarity. You're familiar with this particular object so many times, so that you don't forget the shape of this cup, color of that cup, and you will have no problem remembering that object. Same as if you have a chair, maybe that might be your favorite chair at home. You have been sitting on your chair for decades. So that you remember that, rocking chair or whatever the chair that's very comfortable, you think is comfortable. So you will remember that whenever you go, wherever you go, as soon as you think of my chair at home, there's no obstruction. There's no blurry that actually obstructs you, prevents you from remembering that object, that you remember that, right? It is because you have familiar with this particular object.
제가 그한테 템바스야 돼. 말도 여대지. 안다 들들에서 대모전 나오더래. 세시지가 그러지로. 말도 여여들. 자다 유지 쳐봐서야. 내가 소소고 통화다. 투반데 내가 지금 뭐 제일 야양 리벌 때니 치스도 제지도 와. 어디 템바게 유지 쳐봤는데 저래. 다 남이 쳐봐. 센지 제바면 봐서야 돼. 제가 남이 쳐봐 센지 제바면 봐서. 다 야양 리뷰 뭐 때려야 소소게 아니 생기 맞이 받자고 야양 또 이제는 맞이 받자고 제수이나 담봉을 해서도 Ndivyo ngo juo ina ya Jesu ma ina ana ya me ba chan re mar ne ti mo bo so ge shi ten ana ya shur je no do ji ka se mo to thot ne jwa ne ti me je wa ta ji ka re se ji ka mo to wa jwa da de de wa cha wo je ba da shi ban ka we che so wa ngar chi we da je sha so bo ngar chi we da shi gi me so wa da ta re shi ba da je ban ka ngar chi we de je sha na 시고 요스나 제트는 시고 매서 오고 그래. 저 시고 요 제샤는 매히바 차다래. 저서 마신의 시고 요스나 누구요 뭐. 저 제트는 시고 매서 나오고 그래. 시바를 지금 가 외쳐. 저서 센지 제반 남비 쳐다 센지 제반 매 봐서 삼보 남비 쳐봐들이야. 리뷰 뭐 보데 센 마제 받지 그래서. 야야야야. 박은 리뷰지네. 센지 마제 받지 그래서.
The second characteristic is aspect that we talked about earlier. The aspect is to not forgetting that particular object. Not forgetting is the aspect of the mindfulness. And so if you forget that, and then you wouldn't say that I'm mindful of that. I remember this and that, because sometimes we have a tendency of saying that, well, I used to know that. Or sometimes we say, I know that, but I forgot. That is contradictory. You forgot, but you don't know at all. But we have a tendency of saying that. So well, I know that, but I forgot. So that means you don't know. So that means this is not that mindfulness is not a full-fledged mindfulness. Full-fledged mindfulness should consist of object, aspect which is not forgetting, and then the functions will be explained later.
다 제주 선바데 넘버 메뉴에 제에서 다 그로 제대로 버데 리뷰 뭐 버제 남비 쳐바제 다 제대로 쳐바 넘버 메뉴에 제에서 다 소소 리뷰 뭐 버데 세게 마제 버제네 마제 버제 맞지 넘버 메뉴 와서 가도이나 텔이야 얘네 샤샤 버제네 넘버 메뉴 와서 당마 모두 대 전다 지상 당게 당야 버는 넘버 인도도 현재 상 그냥 간대로 집에 걸어야 지 만들긴 되고요. 상대도 현재 컨트롤하잖아. 야, 지 자주고 세는 것들 내지 상당히 되고요. 상대도 도세 이인이 소소기 리가 걸어봐. 상대도 쇼한다도. 당고서 나주 신의 걸으시는 고바스 그러와. 자상 고바게 도세 소소기 디빙 받들어야 세 다른에 맞도지니 유시하다 연 쇼로도 와서 된다. 쇼주주 말해서 넘버 메인 와서 삼고 집이 뭐 보더라 센지 집이 티니 넘버 메인 와지니 세지도 되려야 아니 또 선조도 제레 제레데 아니 그런 집이 뭐 보다 가려야 이연 메인 와지니 때문에 샤도 와지 그래서.
So then the functions is not only that you're not forgetting that object, but undistracted. That is single-pointed observation of this particular object. This is a function of the mindfulness in this particular context. Because just think about we all are familiar with our daily practice, such as reciting mantras, sutras, and so on. When we are reciting it, in the beginning, we may find ourselves in tune with our motivation, the presence of our motivations, and not being distracted by any external object. But as you read through those, whatever the verses that you may be reading, at some point that you will find that you're actually reading the text, but in your mind is wandering somewhere. That means the mindfulness regarding this particular text that you are reading is not full-fledged mindfulness. You're actually not paying attention to it, but just reading the words, but you forgot to pay attention to it. Similarly, when one is engaging in practice of bodhicitta, the most important practice, then in the beginning, we are fully motivated to engage in the practice of bodhicitta. And as you engage in the practice of bodhicitta, when you go through the process of engaging in the practice of bodhicitta, at some point again, when you remember, your mind is somewhere else. You're unable to really to observe what needs to be observed. So that happens to all of us, which is our untamed mind. It's also called mental wandering, or also it's also known as agitation, mental wandering. And so this is one of the most strong obstacles or the hindrance for our practice of shamatha, this mental wandering. So therefore, when we talk about mindfulness, we're not just maintaining this mindfulness, but this very mindfulness that we are talking about in this particular context. And we're talking about mindfulness that serves as a condition for one's practice of shamatha.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
So if you're practicing mindfulness with the three functions, object, aspect, and function,
Consciousness.
would that be considered moving towards the luminous mind, the pure natural mind? So, I mean, because of that enlarged awareness, and you remember that? I don't know, I mean, that's just a question.
Well, that's a good question, yeah. That's fine, yeah. Because, and then when the front of step, and the Cambodia, Islani, KJ Sum was, the KJ Sum of step, and that's it. Yugi Kavachi, Nabe Kavachi, Jelly Kavachi Sum, the Martesi looks not the Kavia. The Jing Tenshi, Tembe and the Tenshi in Yamendi, and the Tembe in Yamendi, or Jebu Chor, the commissar of Maubayaji, dear water consumer. Wesel Mundikia, consumer, Kenching Mendo Search. Wesel Yawa. She was in single on the poor Wesel, luminous marks of the Stuck on the same behind the Wesel situation. Delia came and Rossi in Delia. Kim wanted to hear Kenchi or a vessel to produce their cover, but what you did. Temper was to what was kind of special.
Chidan Timba Secret, Timber Temple Sodore, and the Tenshi Degi, Tadu can't do words now. Tajadan de Timba de Chomboji Pejana, de Jirero, Chujo Tanishiwaina, Vesas Nada, and Vesa Bruyage, Toleo Kujenjegre, and then Sanji Kopan in Naya, Timber Tinibure, Chanju Santa. One of the visuals but they in Timbic Dure. And the young children, Chumainke, sorry, then around the Naju, Chichoki, Liru, Tasaina, Timbaya Boyana, they want to call it so the South Sobota, Yaboyungurova, Jatan. That would Timber singing the other children, Chumain, Big Java, Tada, Yaboyu, Yaboyunguna, Timber Yabojuna, and other Chichu Chumai Jatamji, Yaboju to Agi, Rivayo, the Timbade, Coinjimi Church Mare. Coichu Chumai Tamjeria, do I think it yet, and then was a cause Timba Shedia, so Moide Sanji Copan, so Sanji Copan, Tamiji Copan, 제도를 temate yabu gorsa gore. 제가다 산지 고고 마도노에니다. 제 자주 세다 번이나 소고도 어 공리 용고 거로 공하나 아니 제물에 상고로 상원의 튜브로 저도 튜브 돼 상상에 공도 또 나를 좀 그걸 제가 대비해 속에 맞아를 붙이는 내용도 또 그러죠.
So yes, this mindfulness, the practice of mindfulness, it actually becomes a condition for actualization of luminous mind. That's true. And not only that, but also mindfulness also become a condition for achieving complete state of enlightenment. But mindfulness is required for everything, in other words. Practicing bodhicitta requires mindfulness. Meditating emptiness requires mindfulness. And not only that, if you think about our ordinary day-to-day work, our day-to-day chores, it requires mindfulness. So mindfulness actually become a very source of all these activities, both mundane and super-mundane activities. If one is desiring for, complete one's job, in other words, it requires mindfulness, right? And so mindfulness requires for both mundane activities as well as super mundane activities. But in this particular context, when we talk about mindfulness, this mindfulness that we're talking about is to become a condition for omniscience, or the state of complete state of enlightenment. That is the kind of mindfulness we're talking about, because mindfulness is required for all the practices, right from the beginning. To perfect one's practice, we need to first, there are three things that are very important for us to perfect one's practice. First, which is to listen to the teachings, or receiving the teachings, and listening and paying attention to it. And samba, which is contemplations. Whatever the teachings that you may have received, and it is important to contemplate one's mind upon the meaning of the teaching that you may have received. And this is then finally followed by meditations. All of this listening, contemplation, meditations requires a mindfulness. So in other words, the mindfulness is the basis upon which we build our spiritual quality.
네, 내가 체주선데 메모저도 붙여보래. 당번 리뷰 보면은 다들 제가 제고요 말. 제대로. 제가 제와 있나요? 센지 맞게 제고 그러는 것도 오늘 제가 제 휴지는 뭐 보여도 제가 체주니 받으면은 무슨 말이야? 제 뭐지든 되어 있나요? 체에서 무슨 뭐 제로 보여요. 말도 제니 다다 받으래. 시지가 내가 뭐 장요래데 가 잡아 서만한테 제비를 대우부터 제선도 못 보지. 근데 이제 체주니 받으니까 그거 쓰지 봐면 봐서. 다 손바닥 가르나 뭐도 맞이 봐이나요? 유지 간이야 로드 티지도 샤도 오면 와. 근데 이제 나보면 와서 그거. 제주 대선 손비 돈에 나는 지금 그래 서서 제바데 땡고 차고 그랬더니 관이 공대 팬이 다른 아니 제비 기니바 담에도 팬이 그걸 니가 떠나지 좋아되니 슈를 미지비 손세 통로죠. 배는 것도 진다에 그러잖아요. 나한테 서대 동보에 슈지니야 지 그럼 상급지 비슷하게 그래 안에 그래도 슈지 먹고 다니 그러나 도치 좀 그래야지 정도 와. 태나시게 마들로에게 니바데야 고만이 건데 빼네. 그럼 니바게 야 새로 좀 한테 깔이야. 아니 그럼 또 그러야 지 대 공차왕게 아니야. 야진도 돼야 되잖아. 아니 미집에 손상이 더더고요. 미집에 손 더서이나 아니 말도 지서서 간다지 시지에 간다지 장와이나 아니 제만은 나가 내대 거로와. 와드네인데 가는 것은 미집에게 아니 가서 knowledge as very kind of yours to watch as a debate, a woman giving over so we are tell us saying Majaba check we are they tended the number of me what was at the we are the draggy and so knowledge again and the temple. You are the Mars from Hibas and Majaba, the name was.
So to summarize this mindfulness, again, the mindfulness, as we mentioned earlier, because the mindfulness consists of three characters. First, the object. Second, it's its aspect, which is not forgetting. And the third is the function. Function is to single-pointedness, single-pointedness on the object, which is observing whatever the object that has been observed should be inseparable from one's own mind. So one should not, if one is distracted, or if one remember not very clearly, then the mindfulness that you have is not full-fledged mindfulness. It is still, you could say simulated kind of mindfulness. So, so then this mindfulness as a constant practice on such mindfulness, and eventually this mindfulness becomes so stable and adamant. So this mindfulness will never be, destroyed by any distractions. It requires a lot of practice. Just practicing for a couple of days or a couple of months will not help us. Will not be able to stabilize this mindfulness. Will not be able to, become one's mindfulness adamant. So once you are able to reach such an adamant state of mindfulness, then what we call mindfulness, it is a inconceivable quality of mindfulness, what we call inconceivable quality of the mindfulness. And when one is able to achieve the inconceivable quality of mindfulness, will then enables one to achieve what we call the characteristic of unforgetful. So you will never forget the object that is being mindful of. You will never forget an object, and that is, and these are the process of practice, and making when you are practicing mindfulness, making sure that your mindfulness is a full-fledged mindfulness, which is it has its object to remember, and not forgetting that, not only just having object, but that object of observation should not be forgotten, and not only that you do not forget that object, but also single-pointed, by observing that object, and this should be stabilized through constant practice, and that stabilization of this mindfulness will then become what we call infinite or inconceivable quality, which is it possesses an inconceivable quality that leads to the unforgetfulness.
Then the temper the so we jury, so I'm not so Lord Yorwa, or Ted number so jury. When a cheju tells Mazo, then that kind of tell and the chemical cheju from what some way. When the end of Vagina, they longer typically giving what they do. Sing Majibatala Chabor. Then I get double Mayo to Sebastian in the town of Tangor. Chada, number years of Nani, and I temper the Yadajum brother. The jet are in and temper the time, Tam Jesha, she made that. Chada, Mother, you can't a kind Tanguina, so the ten will not nega na only should be changes on what center. Changes on Mazana, temper you human.
So if, for instance, if one is very familiar with particular object, that you have no problem of remembering that particular object, right? And not only that, you are not forgetting that object at all, and you're able to observe that object without any distractions. And that is the full-fledged mindfulness. You have full-fledged mindfulness with regard to this particular object. So this kind of, mindfulness is required to be cultivated uh, in this particular context when we talk about practicing mindfulness in this particular context.
난디 무서 단대슈지야데 템바 과데 템바스야데 유젠데제 유젠제 로제 로그나니 센터 센주니는 센주데 센주제 센주제 단디 템바데게 가르 템고 열서 저러다 템바지나 템바지 지제로 유지 템고와 제가 ndi mu bo ji ten wo wa dan di mu bo tan da kan de ten ba da ka ten wo na yo ka cha na yo la ba so sha wo kan da la ba so.
So now here, let's talk about what kind of mindfulness we're really talking about here in this particular context. In other words, the training anthology of Shantideva. Now, let's talk about mindfulness. Mindfulness itself is subjective. We talked about earlier. And it is mere consciousness. And out of that, among the consciousness, there are primary mind and mental factor. But this mindfulness belongs to the category of mental factor, not a primary mind. So what is being, remembered, or for what purpose that we're practicing mindfulness in this particular context is practicing the mindfulness in this particular context is to be mindfulness of three high trainings. Three high trainings. The higher trainings will be the object of the mindfulness of this particular practices mindfulness.
Da laba son man so habi laba son siadre da laba son de laba tsundi laba je laba tingi laba hira laba as tere
The three high trainings are here. The high trainings of the morality, first, ethical discipline, and second, in higher trainings of concentration, and the third is higher trainings of wisdom.
Da laba tsundi laba siade jadang tsundi siade jawa kire jine shalas labore leja kire shalas labudo tene bogere jine da tsundi siade shalas siade tunda de sarva siade sarva siade tsunjaji duma sarva labore da kanda 당을 순진되지 되냐 아무도 라바 순진이 라바 순진해야 돼 술 팅데 습관이래 벽에 나는지나 벽에 나는지나 술 팅스 술 써야 돼 술도 좀 봐야 돼 술도 좀 봐. 하나 좀 무슨 지금 매력 계단도 술도 좀 봐지래 세주로 와 술도 좀 봐. 팅 써야 돼 당도 지금 정말 여러 지제 저거 말해서 저를 늦게 받을 팅당 기수 늦게 받을 팅당 기마서 거론가 소소게 팅요와 제가 초단 준비 팅지가 순진스가 원다 다시잖아.
So the first higher training is called the higher trainings of morality or the ethical discipline, which in Tibetan, which the original translation from the Sanskrit for morality is Shila, which is translated in Tibetan as a sultan, composed of two syllables, sultan. So is accordingly, Tim is a discipline. One is actually, the discipline accordingly, discipline oneself accordingly, in other words. So here, In other words, when speaking about observing morality, morality is something that it is practiced. First, it's practiced mentally. How do we protect our mind from having a bad intention, in other words, harmful intentions? How do we refrain ourselves from having harmful intentions?
变成少剧把帮忙的，真的少剧把帮，加上少剧超过马来西亚的，过存到特别成绩了哇，所以呢，得热死了的，所以呢，少剧就马来西少剧帮来，没些把帮来的，所以呢，就得经常讲的讲呢，靠少剧把帮完的，少剧把帮过来，但能不去哪里呀？少剧帮完的成绩的，成绩的。 加上别其他的迹象呢，加上少剧帮忙的，少剧超过马来是的，他讲的几百就哪用了，上几个几百有了吧，少剧超过马来是，加上少剧超过马来西亚的，成的出当特别成的也少了，上几个几百难的，上几个几百难的，讲的去了去买一把刚才的些玩呢，少剧没弄完就绕过。 제가 소주 룸을 말해준 상식이만 제발 나한테 수단 팀이 등지를 해서.
So then, for instance, let's talk about the morality of abstention from killing, taking the life of others. It's a totem. It is action that is carried out accordingly. What does that mean? What that is meant by totem or the shila or the moral conduct or the ethical discipline. And so, because something that is inappropriate to do need to be abandoned, and we need to abandon both mentally, physically, and verbally. In other words, the actions of all three doors becomes harmful, and that is harmful to others, then that is inappropriate. So this needs to be abandoned, and then you have a certain discipline in your mind that I should not do that, and the very disciplinary mind is called sultan.
就像少剧完的，前三年喜欢的，没这么就少剧完呢。你体育说是你把当用过了吧？他一个不成立，你把当年说是刚给蒙不起，开个结个了吧？村里马送完进的，
所以
这少剧完的，村里马送少剧送完呢，村里马送完了，村里马送呢，村里马送的少剧完呢，少剧给来给说是你把当用过了吧？你把当用说是东西用过了吧？这东西的。 가를 때는 좋아하는村里少집에村里마송할 때는 좋아하는 다少집에村里송아이나 소소少집하고 눈에대 설로고 여러와 제가 실라 세야돼 단다데 설와 세야돼 제가少집에村里송아이나 소소少집에 오기 니바데 연금하러 제가少집에 니바데少집에 오기 용하러 어두스 때는 내가 차대로다 설와 세 실라 세 설와 세야돼 천재지 동안 살아왔으니 자리 도서래.
the civil like silver.
강에 살아왔어.
강에서 homeless.
나 소원을 주고 소원을 니바 주고라. 니바데 순수는 거 니바데 우마라.
So I know, in other words, if we do not observe moral discipline, indulges in negative bodily actions, and particularly engaging bodily actions of taking the life of others, particularly the human beings, then not only that you are accumulating negativity that you will experience the consequences in your future life. But also in this life, you will be punished. One will be punished as a result of one's actions of taking a life of human being. It is, it is because that you are unable to observe morality. We're lacking morality. So if one is able to, observe this morality or observe moral discipline, and one will be protected from engaging in those kind of actions. As a result of protection of those kind of actions, one will not accumulate any negative karma, so that one will not experience the consequences of the negative karma. Because if one is engaged in any negative deeds, whether it is minor negative deeds or the major negative deeds, irrespective of what kind of negative deeds that one may have conducted, and its consequences is infallible. And the individual who actually indulges on that particular activities will experience the consequences of their own actions. So therefore, the first out of three trainings, the training of Shila, which is the moral, ethical discipline, is called the basis upon which the two other trainings of concentrations and wisdoms can be built. So we'll stop here with this, and then we can ask the questions.
Well, it was proposed to me that, so Shantideva wrote, or Shantideva recited Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life.
He composed.
Yeah. That day,
Yeah, that's right.
and then they wrote it down and saw what it was and went and looked for it. They found him in southern India, I believe.
Okay.
And he said, oh, no. I wrote this book. If you guys cared about it, it's up in the eaves of my house at the monastery. Do you know this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. So my question is the Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life the PowerPoint of this book? Okay? Or, so like we could look at it, like I've read Guide many times, so can I go ahead and look at the patience chapter? Or will it confuse, if you understand is it a PowerPoint or is it an advertisement? I know it's an odd question, but does the Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life correspond to this book?
Is it a complete summary of this?
Right. And so if you read the Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life, can I read this in the same order and read chapter 6, patience?
Mm-hmm.
Where do I go in this book to get the whole explanation? I need a little bit more.
Okay.
This chapter is perfection of moral discipline.
Yeah. No. I mean, and that's what I'm saying is,
Okay.
can I use the two bits, or will that confuse me? Because up here maybe not just.
Only you know.
So yes or no?
Long and the theory and ratio is that in the part Joe Doctor Shivresina. Canadian the courses of the Canada. Katie Shola, Junju Sunday Kavlia, Junju Sunday Sundalia, and Nambalia, Yever was Jayana. In Karika Cheniachi, and the looking on Terrain. Shola. 자바 포조도 쉬워야지. 근데 뭐는 다 이게 막 숨을 가려니 그래서 너무 지 그제 되게 이제 가수도 되게 제가 막 이걸 거에 또 왔어. 처음에 그들이시다 이걸 막 방금 게 거에 또 왔어. 그때 저스 개념은 더 그런 데 되게 나이를 두고 써야 돼. 그 지원문에 되게 다 계속 쉬어라게한다. 그 전주기 단데 럽디디 전주 저차대로 봤어. 저차고 차고 말했어. 저차고 봤어. 저차에는 이제 다 전주 나게 류두가 세벨리 쇼로바 세벨리우디 류기 저한테 단데 럽디 나게 가방에 그랬어요. 근데 그저 도다 되는 거죠. 야면에 발음 제거를 야면 저 감상으로 이게 류 주고 감상도 그냥 강게 류되게 맞대요 제제 이게 류 주고 감상 받점 이제 된 되고 봤어. 네 대해야지.
제 담을 그 그런라나 이래 주단을 되게 준주기 이거 있어. 얘는 제일 그래 요라게 라티디 뭐는지 준주디 쇼를 말해. 당도 듣지만 그다. 저라고도 다 라티다 준주도 kontu 주셔 봐. 얘는 되지만 내나를 만들어 가지고 거의 괜찮다 지금 왕게. 라티디 도모고를 주셔나 소나는 되니 또 자는 거지. 준주디 치스 나는 달래. and 소정 도나이 그래 소장이 들어와 제가 딱그 뒤고 나는데네 뒤지 리지 뒤지 잡아만 된다는 넘버 때니 나가리야 송송게 나가리야 페르를 쓰고 때인데 되네 주주 영에서 준비 얘기야 지리야 얘기 펜 and 준주 차상하지 다 사막이 알아야 말때 무시 영어 전화한테 펜이 네 은 거기서 내가 있어. 근데도 무시 준비 영어 매제 가서 또 있어서 은 그래서 컨트롤 줄. 은 도스. 이거 괜찮지로. 다 지난 자를 그때 까지 집에 가려도 그 바다 막고 지를 보여요 봐. 존나 때서래. 다 담아들여서 담아 주셔.
First, the training ontology of Shantideva is actual commentary of Guide to the Bodhisattva's
Oh, okay, that's okay.
It's commentary of Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. But if you think about the evolution of these two,
Right.
the anthology, the training anthology of Shantideva is written prior to Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. That is, it is said that he has actually composed this training anthology of Siksa Samuccaya privately all by himself.
Right.
And then later on, he gave the root teachings of this training anthology, Shantideva, which is Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life as later.
Okay, so they are related.
They are related, they are.
And so like, I have a special thing with patience. So I've been reading in here and it seemed, that's why the question, because it seemed I've been reading this chapter over and over and now I read it and now it's like it went from homework to poetry.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's good.
당 돈이 받아 쇼라.
No.
단이 받아 받더라.
네.
저번에 레드 그러면 가서 요래. 배나 네 사진 나타나 레오고가 잡아서도 레오고가 잡아 쇼라지나 니제 수주소 되는 거. 니제 수주소도 나면 라바꾼이 되발이 디바르 좀 레오디 제바와서. 근데 선대제 벌받지 말고 벌받지 말고.
So chapter 9 in this training anthology
Yeah.
is the explanation of chapter 6 of Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life.
Right.
Yeah.
No, but it's not my imagination.
Okay.
Okay.
근데서
This one.
Tuche.
제가 담보대 가요 말해. 다 주산되는 여러 좀 된디니 아니 도스만 주가 방아지 바카나 요르세요. 또 친구야. 모두 좀 된디니 아니 장자야 주니마 응고를 그래도 바보 타면 주니 다시 해요. 단나기 시발하고 주니서 무슨 나갈에 편로이나 근데 작은 수익 과발을 해줘라. 저를 용서해 주라. 안 된다.
So, this question often being asked by many people because when the Shantideva gave the teachings of the Guide to the Virtuous of Life, he was said, as he gave the teachings, as the time goes by, he was actually floating in the air and he finally disappeared and they did not know where he is going. And then often the question was asked that by people that saying, who actually then be able to retain all those teachings that he has given at that time? And because, as he go further,
Right.
and his voice or the sounds will become weaker and weaker, so the people will not hear the voice. But at that time, just as mentioned, that there are many extraordinary individuals, the practitioners were there, who actually has all those, clairvoyances, and who has a very bonding connection, karmic connection with that Shantideva, so that they are able to retain all that, and whatever the teaching that he has given, and they were able to jot down verse by verse while he was giving the teachings.
So it was like almost like their minds were like tape recorders.
Yeah, that's right. You could say
That's
that.
what you're saying. I'm trying to put it to where, right?
It's like a messenger.
So-
You send a message.
Yeah.
Shantideva got it from Manjushri, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So, and then, please, Kevin.
Your question. Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure I understand the idea of inconceivable mindfulness that never forgets.
Inconceivable quality of mindfulness. Yeah. Never come.
Yes. So I assume that doesn't mean that your mind sees all things that it has learned at the same time, and that you have a mental consciousness that encompasses everything at once.
Oh, okay.
So that's the first part of it.
Okay.
So asking that part first.
That wouldn't be mindful.
That again, that Jamba. Tishana Vikavia, that Jamba de Kijisum de Sumbravas. Kijisum de Sun, Kazan de Kijisum de Jamba de Nyamle Cherry, Kangi, Yonzam Chelia, and Susu, ya Tembe, Tapanda, Rajes name in the Koyunde, Tame Paris, Sumbravas. They any Mijay Sum. And then I want to share to Graces, Kanas. That the Tembe never Tame Pesadi, Pets of Sedigalia, the Konosum Jelen, Tembe never Tame Pay on the Native Shetante Malibu Enteraching Worbes. Shetante Chijet Condachi Jamashun Worbes.
되어버려. 제가 네가 타면도 지저도 전투 그게 뭐게요 말로. 저단 temba 네가 타면도 배워요 맞지? 내가 네가 타면도 배만 더 있는 것도最近的最面才就是吧，是吧？最近的最面才就是吧，是吧？研究一呢，这讲究个生意呢，这都能这个写了一呢，这基本最近最面年度啊。做完电过就能做完电门给俺修来的就多，那这边呢都是电江北呢，那什么说了呀，就专门给农行团员，那感觉呢，搞得讨论得讨论，说个版本最近的我的俺修就给落的，天天中多啊，但这几个月了，但这边他们都培养越是，去年季节都这样越了，本来上季用别个了，那哪些个去年季节都。 zing yo ro auto sre tena chu de ji do ko lo yo le ten wo
So here, just mere having this inconsiderable mindfulness alone will not actually lead oneself to remember entire phenomena simultaneously. So, yes, there are some, mindfulness that enables one to, uh, realize or remember the entire phenomena across the board, the entire spectrum of phenomena. In other words, this can happen, but it is only when the individual has gained omniscience. It's only that, okay? But for us, when we talk about here mindfulness, the mindfulness can be uh, mindfulness with effort, it can be mindfulness without effort. So there are two, right? Similarly, as we have a practice of renunciations, there are renunciation with effort and renunciation without effort. The effortless renunciations. Similarly, it goes to the practice of bodhicitta, effort and effortless, and then also the wisdom realizing emptiness. Emptiness, uh, wisdom that realizes emptiness with effort and without effort, and effortless emptiness. So, but even though that one may have gained this effortless mindfulness, it is not necessarily that one will be able to remember entire phenomena, simultaneously in other words. But the first, oh, okay. First, important for us is to perfect one's practice of mindfulness with effort. Practicing mindfulness with effort. And as a result of prolonged practice on mindfulness, will then lead oneself to the achievement of effortless mindfulness. When the effortless mindfulness is taken place within the stream of oneself, then one doesn't need to think of when I should remember that. That mindfulness is will always with you.
이래요 전도성도 나시 장로서 산주주 또범해서 또범해서 산지 나시 장로 청문에서 냠주로니 뭐 참고 그래 양 전도성도 뭐 산주주 또범해가 거는 대 산주주 또범해서
But this particular mindfulness that we are talking about in this particular context it's a conceptual mind. It is a conceptuality. But when it comes to the omniscience, that is free of conception. It's a non-conceptual. In other words, it is a non-conceptual consciousness. But there's no conception of conceptual minds or conceptual consciousness is present in someone who is already enlightened, because their conceptions are already purified, and whatever the consciousness they may have is a non-conceptual.
Okay. The night before the Buddha was enlightened, he had the three visions, and
Can you speak up just a bit?
I can't. My throat is. Oh, okay. Sorry. The three visions that he had, and one was the past lives, and then seeing the karma of all beings, and then he could recall those at any time that he needed to, but that he had the condition of being conscientious about the 10 fetters, of the 10 fetters being free of the 10 fetters at all times. So I was wondering if that is,
What's the 10 fetters? What that is?
well, I couldn't tell you specifically what they are, but the concept is that they're the 10 things that keep you going down and up around in samsara. So when you're free of those 10 fetters.
Give them your mic.
You want a mic?
Hmm?
Mic?
Yeah, because we couldn't hear you.
It would be very helpful. Or what is the question you're going to ask after?
Well, I wanted to know that is the Buddha, the third vision of the Buddha before he was enlightened, has the condition of being mindfully free from the 10 fetters.
The 10
Fetters.
That keep you on the circle of.
Oh, no, it's fetters. What's the 10 fetters? Can you, because I have to have this in,
Yes, I know
Yeah,
that, but
I have to-
I can't call them to mind, but that's not the point. The point is that the Buddha was able to be mindful of this continuously, whereas the other two visions he had, which was past lives and karma of others, he could pull those up at an effort. But the one that he was effortless was the 10 fetters, but he was consciously mindful of those all the time, and that was a condition, where the other two were unconditioned. So I was just wondering if that would be an example to what Ken asked, which was the qualities of the mindfulness. It's just a comment, it's not really a question, but
you say that the Kunadi continued to share great Marsha, the Samjas and the Horn, the Chinalia. Sanje, Samajebe, Nimichi in Mondo, Nimichi in Arolia, Nimichi in Arolia, and the Chumbresa, that is another Sum Jumwe, Keterito, the Horn. They need arena, Dana Chig, Sengame, and the Chig. Lyric and the line, forget Donara Chimney, Donalia, and the Chig. Minam Jumio, the Kandachi, this temperature on the temple. Sazan Tonto, on the seat of 7 in the city. And then Kusukunga made and the Chig. Kills and membership, Nameka, Lay Kana Sasha to get there. Don't of rest. The diggy Koran did not pay the condition of the beginning, she went check and dig it. So you are speaking no seven. And then the Yachi coil. Kiji Judensis, but they could Juden Kakar as the Koran line look. The near that Kisha Kingan was. The edging up, Kosoi. Some I gave a Nimichi and Marolia, Mogolia to Sibres. They get there, swimming in way, don't Sibres. So that day, 20 saying in the legend that Mercy Jevin and the young women was at school and the soup. We say that George Kevin look. Want to scan
Reda the Zichore, Sunday, second day to Jomale, Toran Sanjibare, Jason, Conan Yambasha, Umar, Sir to Conan Yambasha, Toran was Sanji Saware, Jason, Nimaji Marusambo, Sir Joma Geta, the Tenzang Chan to the Juni Palace to German Duagate. Sebe Juji, Shoki Torani, Joma Shoki Toran Padre. So John Secret Duagate, Santos Retus. Then do go Jujin Nimbo, Delayan, Jesus or woman with your temple, tell you try to read. In a Twitter to me said, so be Jinipa, San Pandoin and Twitcher. 소소 담배지 지면은 나가 쉬고 있었다나 해야 되는 저 메시라고 해요.
Also.
Hmm?
So Buddha has said to be gain enlightened on the 15th of the 4th lunar calendar. And prior to that, it is said that he was in a deep meditation prior to that. And because prior to his enlightenment, it is possible that his mindfulness, whatever that is being mindful, can be with effort, mindfulness of effort, with effort. But once it's already gained state of enlightenment, the effort is not needed.
Right.
Even here now, the vision that we may have about his past life, and not only the past life, because of the karma of his past life, if Buddha has made an effort to remember that prior to his enlightenment, and by means of his effort, if he is able to remember all his past life and the past karma, then that is the mindfulness of with effort. But without putting an effort, it just had a vision by itself, having a vision, without putting in any effort, and that is the effortless,
Right. Yeah.
thing. So we're not sure whether it's that a vision that we had is he put in effort to remember about his past life and karma, or it just happened to his mind.
Condition, or it was either a condition or an unconditional state, but it seems that, as I remember it, and I'll try to recall it the next time I
Okay.
bring it up.
So we should say the dedication prayers. We begin on page 23 and 24, and then continue with auspicious wishes on page 28. Saji Puti
Roje Medo Tan Rera Neje Nide Nyebani Sanje Yindo Mede Buayi Rugu Nanda Yela Jebara Sho
Dewa Kundu
Yada Lama Dan Jame Juje Gala Loje
Sada Lagi
Yede Rado Ne Doje Changi Goba Ne Dojo
Yedam Guru
Prana Mendala Gandhi Adaya
Jetsun Lame
Kwasera Tenje Nanga Dele Jojo Deba Rosan Tembe Reme Sansoji Roye Meze Tato Ne Joji
Kari Rawe
Koye Shinkango Bedan Dewa Male Jovene Chere Zuma Tenze Jasoyi Yabe Sede Pado Tenjuroji
Champel Pawu
Cheta Chembana Kondo Sambo Deya Dejente Kada Gunje Yeso Daloje Gewan de Da Tamje Rato No De Son Jebe Jawa Tamje Moa Gana Jodo Ngapane Dagi Give Zawan De Gwenya Sambo Jeje Rato No Aji. Thank you.
Shit.